know
No,
that's where I was.
just because there's two types doesn't mean there's two segments.
Do the stored
Throwing
one
that
today, and we'll do the reflected one next month.
It's not going to happen. So yeah, you're absolutely right. There is stored and reflected.
What do they mean?
So we'll come on to exactly how they work.
Yeah.
When we put it together. But
Excellent.
Reflected essentially means you're going to do something on a website, and it's going to get reflected or shown. The results will be shown straight back to you.
Okay.
You know, or it will throw it back at you like looking in a mirror. Stored is I'm going to save something in the background of a website,
right,
and then it'll be thrown at other people.
Right. Stored on the website.
Stored somewhere and then brought back in from storage.
Love that.
And there's two types. So actually, we're going to start with reflected.
Yeah.
Because it is probably the easier one to grasp, and the principles of stored and reflected are actually exactly the same.
Right.
It's just one of them gets saved like for somebody else to see, and one of them doesn't.
Love that.
Nice to see.
Okay.
So, what do we need for our cross-site scripting, reflected cross-site scripting, or any cross-site scripting attack to work? There's one thing that it's absolutely going to need.
Something that you can inject into.
It's like you know this stuff.
Only because it's part of injection. Because it's a category.
So we're just going to throw together a little bit of a form.
Right.
And in that form, let's do an input.
So you're calling the form action?
No, that is what action will this form perform when somebody clicks the submit button.
Excellent.
And an empty action, which is what that is,
yeah,
actually means it will submit back to itself. So it'll just take the details that you put in the form and reload the page with those details provided back to itself.
Sweet.
So we're going to use an empty action so that it will just submit back to itself. And that's purely so that this code is nice and much simpler and easier to put together, and so that we're not having to dive between lots of different files.
I think it was a better idea to make that the name of the form.
I could give it a name. Do you want me to give it a name?
No.
I'm going to do what you did there. I'm going to do it. I'm going to go ID for the form equals.
We're going to call it action. Action John. Action man.
We're going to go action John.
Okay. John.
We're going to give our input a name so that it will appear in our get variables. And let's call this a username. And do you know what? Let's stick a placeholder in there to tell us what we want somebody to type in. So put your username in here, please. And that's our input. So if we save that, and then we refresh our page, we've got the world's tiniest little input.
How did you manage that?
Yeah, okay.
Do that whole thing. Option plus.
Let's do a style. Let's just stick some inline styling in, and we will do a width 600.
No, I see what you did there.
So we'll just make that go all the way across the page. Aha. Let's do a like that. Pick up. Nice. And let's do a try to remember now my CSS. Let's go with there's people going to try and see this from on their screens. Let's maybe try something like that.
Well, there's two people on phones.
That's going to be interesting.
Yeah, you need this to be put your username here. That'll do. That works.
Does that work?
Works for me. I'm sitting in front of a 40-inch screen.
Minor details.
Loads.
Can everybody else see that? Can everybody else see that kind of input that's appeared in our web page on the right hand side? Stunned silence.
I can now, says Anthony.
Excellent.
Because you made it a bit bigger. See?
It's working with you too long, that is.
Yeah.
But actually, we have an input, but we can't do anything with it.
No.
The next thing that we're going to need in here is a button to submit that. So we're going to need another input. This time, it's going to be a nice and simple type submit button, please. And the value that we've got on there, let's do. Yeah, let's go nice and simple and just say submit. Because I'm feeling imaginative. first thing to figure out, when we put an input into the box, where does it go?
The server.
So I'm going to use our new username that's going to be used for everything from this moment onwards.
Action draw. Yeah.
It gets, we hit submit.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure whether it's going to be very clear on everybody's stuff, but up here in the URL, it now says username equals action John.
That's very good.
And it's because the action we were taking for our form was blank, which means it submits it back to ourselves. And by default, forms will submit using a GET request, which means we end up with this username as the parameter. And the name of the parameter will come from the name of the field.
Yeah.
So username equals whatever we typed in it.
Right.
So that makes sense?
It's sent itself to this to itself, its own page as a parameter.
Yeah.
Nice.
And then we do nothing with it.
Yeah.
Because we don't have any code that does anything with it.
Yeah.
We have no way of reading it. So let's get our code to say hello to
Nice.
us. Let's
Yeah.
do that. Let's do a let's say hello.
Is this going to be the hello world? Which is the first thing you have to do on every course.
It could be a hello world, but I think we're going to go with a hello action John.
That's a 3.
Because I don't think Action Man had a catchphrase.
He really did. Action Man, and then it stopped.
That was
There
it.
was no Action Man does something.
No, he wasn't
It was
spinning.
just
He wasn't like
Action
swinging
Man.
from webs or doing it. He
No.
wasn't doing anything cool.
No.
So first thing we're going to do here, let's extract our URL.
Yep.
So we'll go new URL window dot location dot href. So this will go and grab our URL out of the URL address bar. Nice and simple.
Clever.
Which will include now our get parameters.
Yes.
So now we want to get the parameter out of it. So we want to separate the rest of the address from the detail we want, from the word action John, which we've submitted, or whatever else we submitted to there. So we're going to say var username, because we know that it's going to be a username, equals using our URL. Let's search the parameters that we have in there and we will get for the get parameter of username. So this is now going to pull whatever the value of username is. So
Yeah.
username equals, and then whatever comes after the equals is now going to be assigned to username down here in our JavaScript, which allows us to do stuff with it.
Perfect.
Now we want to be able to display something to our user. So the first thing that we need is we need a place to put that on our page. So a place to put a message on our page.
Makes sense.
So for this, I'm just going to do a div, let's say ID equals say hi container, and we'll just leave that empty. So this is just creating a div or a divider in the page, a section of the page that is currently empty, but we have given it a name called say hi container.
And we could give it some properties like turning it into a square or
We can do whatever we want with it at that point.
borders, boundaries, colors,
We can do whatever we want
all
with it at
sorts of
that
stuff.
point.
Yeah.
What we're actually going to do with it is when we retrieve a URL, when we retrieve a username from our URL, let's do get element by ID. So go and find something on the page that has the ID of say hi container. Yep. And then inside that container, so see, I did 2 I's instead of 2 N's.
No, I was going to leave it there so you didn't notice it.
I bet you were.
And then when it didn't work, I'd go, I think I spotted why.
So then we can say hi,
And then
username. It's good to see you. Okay.
yes,
And we'll have that message become. So what we're saying here is look in the document, find something that is called say hi container, and then set whatever's inside that to be this message and to be this text.
super.
Yeah. Except we need this
need
to
to
be
tell
our
it.
actual variable.
Yeah, as opposed to the word username
So rather than doing that, we're going to
and size and all the rest of it might help. because it's a bit dinky. Isn't
Do you want it in the box with some colour and some
it?
size?
No, not at all.
It's too late now. Right, let's do this. So let's go with pixels. Let's go with red. And
48.
48.
Yeah,
You want it to
48.
be massive.
I want it double the size of the other one.
You're going to go that big, huh?
100%.
Why not?
Ta-da!
Is that better?
Much more better.
Do you like that one?
Much more
Is that
better.
much more better for you?
Action John likes it.
Action John likes it.
It's thumbs up on his plastic hand, like that.
Better than you.
Right, so we now have a page which allows us to put some stuff in, and it will tell us, it will replay back to us what we've put in there.
Now
so we can
this-
see it on screen.
This sounds really simple and noddy, and it sounds like something that doesn't exist, right? But actually, this happens on a whole bunch of stuff on the internet, like registration pages, blog comments,
logins, which then
logins that
get
say,
replayed back on
well
every
done,
screen.
you know, that kind of this. If you just ignore anything that happens on the server, this just at a basic JavaScript level happens all the time, where it says you click a button and it says, okay, now I'm loading what you asked for, or thanks so and so, I'm making this request for you, or whatever it happens to be. There's lots of feedback, and we've got used to websites giving us feedback when we click buttons and saying that it's doing a thing. And this is just using an input from us to display that back to us. Now, they get more and more fancy with how they do that, but essentially it's the same thing. So, question for you.
Uh-oh.
Dun, dun, dun.
Dum, dum, dum. Eagle eyes, says Nick.
Oh.
You missed the eagle eye action, man. Like that. I can do that. Yeah. I've even got the COVID haircut that Action Man had, the fuzzy one. It's like Kenneth Paul. It was like fuzz. Did you not have one of those?
I did.
And then they had this was the old hand. They had a new hand after this one. Anyway, go on. What's the question?
With the little thing on the back of his head that you can move
With
around.
the little-
Moved his eyes.
Yeah. Like that.
The question is,
Yes.
We have just built vulnerable code.
No, we wouldn't do that.
We
work
have-
in cyber.
We have right now just built something
No.
that is vulnerable to cross-site scripting.
I'm never going to admit to that.
We kind of did.
Even if I get pen testers in that tell me I've built vulnerable code, I'm going to change the report before I publish it.
But we have. It's too late. We've built it. It's there. It happens. So can you see the problem?
Well, we went in there and said, type your name in here, and we typed in Action John.
We did. Should we type something else in?
We could have typed anything in there, couldn't we?
Let's do a hello.
Hi, hello.
Hi, hello.
Hi, hello.
Hi, hello.
Hi, hello.
So whatever we type in here, it's just going to spit it back out into our page for us. So what happens then if you wanted a picture, didn't you?
I don't mind.
Do you want a picture?
I'm.
I'll tell you what,
We've
let's-
got already.
Let's go with still bbc.com.
Is it code.uk?
Let's try that. Oh, you can't open the BBC that way.
I don't know BBC that way.
Who's
To
like
protect your security.
who's likely to let us do this?
Google, they let you do anything.
Let's try it.
You could do Google Images.
Some either way.
Good suggestion.
It is a good suggestion. Actually, I think, have I got my syntax wrong? I'm going to try ACBS. I might have my syntax wrong. We might have to separate them. And because I'm getting bored of typing that, I'm just going to do. I reckon university's going to be rubbish at this, right?
Did you just pick a university?
Yeah.
So the BBC, who want to share information, won't.
Yeah.
And the university that wants to keep all of its information secure does.
Yeah. So if we do something like that, and then I'm just going to add some styles. Let's go with.
You can make it bigger.
Yeah, let's make it bigger because that seems to be the theme of the day. See, you're not telling me when I'm making typos.
I was waiting until it doesn't work, and then I can go, I think you'll find that's because.
Is that what you're going to go with?
Yeah, I'm primed there. You're going to do that now, and then I'm not going to spot it.
Yeah, I'm going to start leaving them in there to see what happens. So there we go.
So now you brought that up instead.
So we can put something in there, and it will now reflect the HTML that we put into it will be reflected back to us.
Got it.
Because we're not checking that input.
Mm. So the practical applications of this, in terms of, because I've got no checks in there to stop me from putting code in or stop me from running anything in here that's asking, like we've just, instead of putting a username in, we put a website in. What potential damage could be done with this?
So with this form as it stands of cross-site scripting, using this JavaScript approach to processing the data just on this page, as it stands here, I could send you a link that has that parameter filled in with something, like to deface something else.
Yeah.
So I could send you a link that has something in there. Let's say I want to deface a company. Why don't I send you a link to that company's website where this type of processing is happening on the website? And instead of injecting something like a university, why don't I inject a pornography website?
Yeah.
So that when you click on the link that says, we need you to click here and confirm this for us, it opens their official website
with something bad in it.
With something really bad inside it.
Yeah.
That would be one way to go. Or I could make my own website.
Yeah.
What if I made my own website that just had a form in there?
Yeah.
So when it comes to this page, it says, hi, your username that I know. Please fill this in to check the security on your account. But actually what that is it's my website. So when you fill that form in and you hit the button that's on there, it'll say, great, cheers, thanks. But what you've done is you've submitted your password to me. So that's kind of the uses of this one.
Yep.
Which is one way to go. The next logical step, I suppose, that you would take to say, well, great, that's all happening in the browser, right? This is happening because this browser is submitting this back to this page that is loading in this browser.
Yeah.
Yeah. We should get the server to load our page for us instead.
Much better. Much better.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to have to excuse myself for a second because I need to nip to the loo. But when
to.
I come back, let's add some server code.
That's a brilliant idea.
So give me 1 second. I'll be back.
Do that. So we now have a bunch of people. We've got 16 people in here now, so we've got more people have arrived, so we've got more people to play with. We are diving into, as you can see, building this out, because one of the things that we wanted to do was not just sit there and go, here is the actual code that's involved in cross-site scripting in its various forms, but actually to see how this build process works. And all of the build process is, a lot of development when they're doing when you're doing the build process, you tend to just build it out because you're trying to achieve the goal that you're trying to achieve. And then afterwards, you're kind of going back in mind of DevSecOps. is trickier than it sounds. When we present these things, and on the last ones, we've kind of said, here is, for example, the SQL injection, and we presented that, and you look at it and think, what kind of an idiot would ever code that and leave that out? It just, you go, well, that's crazy. Why would you do that? And yet we've just had a nice little relaxed play around, throwing some code up, etc.
Yep.
And it's too easy to do that without giving any thought to, I've created a function, but have I created a secure one? And it's quite tricky, isn't it? Because it's too easy to get carried away when you're coding with, I'm making something, I'm creating something, I'm making something happen on the screen, I'm making something happen on this website or whatever, and leave out those security considerations.
It is. It really, really is. People get bogged down with how it works.
Or whether it works.
And getting it to work. Yeah. And I think a lot of that for me as well comes down to Stack Overflow. And these kind of helpful how-to guides where you type in how do I make it do this? And they go, here's a bit of code that makes it do that.
Just do this.
And then you go, great, copy and paste that code in and it works. And you go, great, and then you move on. And in reality, what you've actually done is created a vulnerability that seems on the surface like it's just a bit of a funny vulnerability, but can be used for some really damaging stuff. So this is one example of a vulnerability that we're going to use JavaScript in here that does this same thing.
Super duper.
So if we wanted to, Martin's got. In my previous company, we were always under pressure to develop quickly. Don't worry about the error routines, leading to poor code, which they said we need to deploy that now. Do you know what? So familiar, something. Yeah, heard it so much. And it's also a question of that, how much time have you got to do it based on how much has the company been paid for you to do it versus how much they're likely to make from you doing it. It's that cost benefit analysis that they do as well.
It is the deadlines, though. It's the deadlines. And do you know what? It's too easy to sit there and think, how long can it take me to take? I mean, we just had a meander through this and it took X amount of time. So you sit there and think, you want me to build this website for you? You want me to build this web app for you? That's going to take me X amount of time. It always takes longer, etc. And then before you know it, it's the day before you've got to hand it over and go live with it. And you still haven't gone back and tried to pluck out all of the because it's, when looked at in isolation like that, it's a very easy thing to look at and go, why on earth didn't you write that in while you were there? If this code got to 800 lines of code and with multiple functions that you've snaffled out of GitHub and a whole bunch of other places and built it all off with suggestions from the web, you know, going back over it takes more time than if you just done it in the first place.
Yeah,
but yeah, it's so true.
It does in the long run.
Working.
I mean, sometimes as well, like you know, Aaron makes a fair and funny comment there. You know, too familiar. It really, really is. You know, sometimes it's just a question of there's a deadline. There's some people are going to be on the system, or there is some large deadline to a company or the project itself that has to be met. You know, you have to have something running, and I can be, you know, I can hold my hands up on it and say stuff that we've built over the years when there has been a deadline like that hasn't always been the most secure thing. And sometimes actually we've resorted to manually overseeing it for the operation of that particular event, to sit there and say, okay, we know that people are going to have to go on this thing to register for something or to do something, and they're going to be on there for a day. So we will put support staff, you know, in the past, we've put support staff sitting on it that day to sit there and go, right, monitor those logs. As soon as anything out of the ordinary is happening, we need to know about it. Because that's a quicker and easier solution to at least we'll know what's going wrong and we can intervene, as opposed to coding it differently or as opposed to going back and working through the security. And we've had to do that in the past. And it's something that happens more often than you think. The key here, though, from a security perspective is this is where NCSC have come up with their security by design and security by default, in that fixing this stuff doesn't take much. It's like the SQL injection stuff we saw last time around. It was like 4 characters, 4 words. And then if you do have to rush through that, 1, you've got at least some protections in there, and 2, make sure that you budget and take the time to go back and fix whatever you broke.
Yeah.
And whatever you
do it as you
ended
go
up
along.
having to not do it. But doing it as you go along is the only way to guarantee it.
Much harder than it sounds. Much harder.
It is a little bit.
Cool.
Okay.
What are we gonna look at next?
So let's change things up a little bit. Let's do some server-side processing of this instead. So the easiest way to do that without spinning up a whole bunch of other files is we'll just do it in PHP and we'll throw that at the top of this document, which will mimic a server doing it for us. So let's say there's a PHP at the top here, and let's say if is set. So we're going to say if our URL has a get parameter in there, and that get parameter exists and is called username. So if it has one of those, then let's create a message for our user.
Yep.
So we're going to do message equals, and actually, do you know what I'm going to do?
You're not going to use a special message.
Let's use the same. So you didn't remind me about speech marks. Let's use the same thing. And
I was going to say, do you want to?
This is slightly different now because in JavaScript we use pluses. In PHP we're going to use dots to connect them. And what we actually want is the that one there. So this is just saying if somebody has set a get parameter for username, somebody put the parameter for username in the URL, set a message to be this. And what we're now going to say, let's get rid of our JavaScript from running for a second. We'll just comment that out at the bottom so that it doesn't do anything anymore. Because what we want to do is put dot. We're just going to echo out
whatever that is,
whatever the value of message is here into here. And just to be a little bit thorough, we'll do a message equals an empty string. So if there's no parameter set, it's empty. If there is a parameter set, then we get our message.
Cool.
Nice and simple. So if we now go and reload our blank page, we get an empty page again.
Yeah.
And if we go,
it's jolly well working. So effectively, what you've got is you've now got the if then else function at the top there is actually behaving or setting up a behavior that would otherwise be done by a server.
Yes. And the key for this actually is the JavaScript stuff that we wrote down here gets executed after the page loads, which means the only things we can really inject into that is things that we want to appear on the page.
Yeah.
The server-side stuff, on the other hand, gets executed and done before the page loads because it would have happened on the server and then been sent to our page, which means we can inject dynamic stuff into that. And just to give you an example of this, if we switch these around, so we'll comment the PHP out, we'll uncomment the JavaScript, we'll then refresh our page. Oh, there was no input on it, so let's go back to that. Right, so that's in there. One of the most common injections that you'll see people using to test something will be something like that. Alert, you have been hacked. Now actually, we need to tell it that it's that it needs to use JavaScript to do that. Copy that for let use. So we're going to sit there and say, inject some script tags, which we know from looking at our code, script tags would execute some JavaScript. But because this page is loading at the moment, using the JavaScript down here, which executes tags in there. The problem being, when pages load, they load the JavaScript and they execute it as they come across it.
Yeah.
So we'd have to put some sort of event handler or something. We'd have to make that more complicated in order to get this to run. So typically, if it's a JavaScript side vulnerability like this, you're not going to get to be able to do much dynamic stuff because it won't actually execute after the page is loaded. If we use the same input though, let's get rid of that and let's move to this server-side processing. Because this process happens, because this processing happens before the page loads, if we put a script into our page, it'll execute it as it passes it when the page is loading. So we can now submit that one and we get an alert saying you've been hacked. We've now got something that is interactive. We've now got something that is dynamically doing, we're inserting code that does a thing into our page. So if we've got something that's happening server side, we've got a lot more options. And we've actually got a lot more options on the kind of attacks we can do here.
Also, depending on what the architecture is at the other end, at server end.
Absolutely. So we're bridging, or we're starting to knock into this idea that we could put something on the server that gets executed by the server. And now we're still in the reflected because it still just sends it back to the person who sent it in the URL. But what about if we put something in here that says, instead of just alerting this, you have been hacked, what if we said, use JavaScript to make a request to my server with all the cookies that are currently on your computer?
Wow.
And just send those to me as a request.
Yeah. Do it.
You know, we could start now putting stuff into here in the JavaScript. That JavaScript that we're injecting, because the processing is happening at the server side, we can start doing much more advanced processing on that side.
And interact with that server. Bring the server, recruit the server into the actual options.
Yeah, and start getting it to do that for us. So that's kind of pushing it up to the server to process. We have the same vulnerabilities, or potentially the same vulnerabilities, and actually, it kind of makes them worse.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah, kind of makes those worse for us on that side. So this is, I suppose, the essence of cross-site scripting. This is the principle of cross-site scripting, is that we can give it some code, it's going to embed that code in the page, and then now whoever's viewing it is going to see the page plus our code, doing whatever it is our code is doing, whether it be client side or whether it be server side. Now, in some languages, it's really, really, you know, you'd think it's very, very hard to get rid of this kind of vulnerability. You think it's awful, right? And
we said that last time.
And they exist because it's really, really awful. Yeah. You ready for this?
Go for it. Done.
Let's try it again. Now, instead of seeing the alert, all it's done here is it said, get rid of, just don't execute it. So we're now no longer, we can't put our styling and all the rest of it into this box anymore either, because we're going to strip it out and we're going to use it here. Now we could keep our styling in our boxes by moving this. And let's just cleanse the parameter that they've given us. We can refresh the same thing. There you go. So we can wrap that one HTML special characters, and effectively it just stops them executing.
Yeah, it's saying don't treat these as special characters.
Yeah, effectively.
Which is very similar to the one that we used on the SQL injection.
Yeah, which was getting rid of SQL special characters.
My SQL character, yeah. Because in that case, we didn't want it tampering with SQL. In this case, it's very similar. It's just saying don't execute special characters as special characters in HTML.
Now we can get a bit more advanced on this. So we can get a little bit more advanced because actually done damage. So we want to stop it from being able to do that.
For
So
normal users, seeing script like this, you know, seeing snippets of code like this is even more scary.
yeah, because now they're looking at code, right?
Yeah.
So we can use something like regex. So let's say couple lowercase. Yeah, why not? Let's allow spaces as well. Username. So we've got if preg match that one to that one, then let's do something like that. Now what this does is it says, okay, if you have a parameter set for username,
Yep.
If inside that username parameter, I can match anything other than like a not.
Yeah.
So if any of the characters in there are not either an uppercase alphabet character,
yeah,
a lowercase alphabet character, or a space, then instead of displaying the message with their input, just display the message, your input was not valid. So in theory, now if we go back over here, we're just getting the your input is not valid. There was an error, something went wrong, we'll try again. And immediately we could try this again. I'll just grab that for a second, so we'll be writing it. Next time we could try that again with a valid input, and it would work. So even if a user arrived on that page, what they'd actually get is I've arrived on that page and they'll get a something went wrong.
Yeah.
And they'll try it again. So now they're saying something went wrong with the link you clicked, so try doing it yourself. Yeah. Much better way to do it. Or forward them off to another page like the home page instead, or wherever you want to go. So now we can start taking actions if there's anything other than an expected input coming into there. And now we're getting into validation. So these are actually two things.
Two. One is the first one that we've just done there, very similar to that MySQL one, is sanitization.
Sanitization.
So we're is it sanitization? Sanitation is pooing.
Sanitization
is making it sanitized.
Yeah, sanitization.
I'll go with that. So sanitization is one of your methods.
Yeah.
For tidying it up.
Sanitize the input so that it can't do any danger.
Yeah, don't do anything bad with whatever's typed in here. Don't run it as code in this case.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas this one is validating and saying match it to these parameters effectively. If it's got to fit within these parameters.
Yeah. We could also replace any of the bad ones.
Yeah.
Would be the other way to go. As another form of sanitization, we could just say, just replace anything that's not a good character, which is what we did with the SQL stuff.
We did. Yeah.
So there's a number of ways to do it. This is doing both now. So it's saying I'm going to sanitize your inputs and I'm going to validate your input. But just in case you get past my validation, I'm then going to sanitize whatever's left.
Yeah, or whatever's left behind. And sometimes you do need to do this. I mean, I remember working on an application where the commands that you had to put in as a user included things like forward slashes and backslashes and what have you, because the command structure on the back on the back of it.
Yeah.
And I'm a really early.
Yeah, sometimes you can't get rid of all potentially dangerous characters.
You have to put it in there because the system itself was expecting it. I'm not, naming no names, SAP. And therefore, the only way you could tidy that was to go in and allow, you could either wipe everything and say, don't do anything except, or you could go in there and literally whitelist characters. Good.
So this is our reflected. This is how reflected works.
Yeah.
There you go.
So we've reflected it straight back on the page.
Yep.
And we've also said it is possible And we've done this with an emulated version of it, but it is possible to be doing this stuff, sending this stuff to the server. The server then processes what was about, stick it onto the server, web page, whatever, and just leave it there for someone else to trigger.
Yeah. So let's see if we can make that happen. Because that's a different thing that I may not have thought about how to work. So let's see if we can do something cool here. So let's say if that's set there, let's do this really simply. File put contents. So if somebody provides us with a username,
yeah,
I'm going to put that into it's not that, is it? Is it file? Yeah, it's underscores.
It did tell you that.
Mate, you're rubbish at this spot in my typos.
Well, I spotted it. And went, well, that's weird. Because it's time to tell him to use that one. It's just fun. Have you never done this? This is like being on Twitch. This is where someone else is playing the game and you're watching them play the game. This is so much different from actually doing it, sitting there going, yeah, I'm doing that, I'm doing that, I'm doing that. Sitting there watching somebody else do it, you go, why do you do it like that? It's very much like watching other people play Dota. And you're not playing yourself, you're just watching somebody else play. Yeah, and then you get the, why the hell do you do it like that? What are you doing that for?
So I'll tell you what we'll do. Let's put file put contents.
Yeah.
So we're just going to store in a text file the username of the last user that accessed this page.
You should call that text file something like last user.txt.
Let's do it.
Oh.
Ooh.
Through cunning plan here.
We should then set their username. Right. Yeah. Sorry, slight logic bug. Because otherwise it'll overwrite itself. So let's do a file. Get contents. Sorry, it's me working out logic in my head. So we need to first see if there is a file. John, I'll just create the file. So we'll go and get the contents from the last user file first and assign it to something that says last user. Let's put a thing under here where we're going to display whoever the last user was. So it can now say so-and-so, hello, with a message.
Yeah.
But let's put another one underneath it that's now contains the last user to say I was there. Last user. Something like that. Let's do refresh. The last user to say hi was nobody, because that was the first time we refreshed the page. And then when we say it again, we get action job. So now if we put in here me, then it says hi Jason, and it tells us the last person that was here was action job.
Sweet, love that.
So we now have a storage mechanism on our server side here, and all it's doing is it's saying if somebody had logged in before, go and get their username from the file that we saved it in. Then we're doing all of this cool stuff to sanitize the input that we just got. So that's still all nice and protected, and nothing can go wrong there, right?
Exactly.
Amazing. And then we're going to put the username that was entered into the file, because they become our new last user.
Yeah.
So when we change this back to action job, it now says Jason was the last one.
Quite right too.
Perfect. Okay. So we now have that running.
Yeah.
So I said the principles are exactly the same between stored and reflected.
Yeah.
The only difference now is we are now storing this input on the server. Yeah. So if I was to, let's use what we had before, our script for
That you
got proper hacked right there.
Yep.
Love it. So we've got this. We submit it and it says, your input was not valid.
Because it wasn't, because we've got that up there.
But the last user here was actually John. So that's all working. And our validation and our sanitization is working absolutely perfectly on our inputs.
We're amazing.
It's amazing. I love it. Let's open a new window. And I'll open a private one so that it doesn't have any of our stored stuff. Now let's go to localhost.
There you go.
And we'll visit this website. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I'm a different browser,
Different browser,
different user,
different
person visiting that website now.
Yeah.
But because it was trying to tell me who the last user that logged in here was.
And the last user was an instruction to do that. That's what it did. Dude. It's like a time bomb.
So that got stored on the server.
Yeah.
I've arrived, and now it's going to hit me with that. Now, actually, these stored ones.
Would it work if I open the browser console and add a few lines of code to the already loaded page? Ooh.
What lines of code are you thinking of adding?
Yeah.
So you can adding code to yourself would make it work. For the JavaScript thing down here, you could make it work on your own browser. But where you don't have any value in doing that is that you can't put that in a link and send it to someone else.
Yeah. And
so you could hack yourself by changing the web page you're on to hack you. You know, in effect, grab your own stuff. But the value of this would be, so script, malicious code script. Yeah, so you could run that in your own browser, and you could do that on any page on the planet.
all the time.
There's actually no way for me to stop you doing that.
But that's like an example of the first reflected piece.
Yeah.
You're just reflecting back to yourself in your own browser.
It kind of is, but because you're altering the code in your own browser, you can't then send that new maliciously injected code to someone else. The site has to be putting it into the code. The site has to be reflecting that input into its own code in order for you to bundle that up and send that off at somebody as an attack. And actually, this is typically the way that a lot of phishing emails and stuff were used to be done, was that they would send you something like this, like a very cleverly crafted payload for a legitimate site.
Although it is funny if you do it on the computer of the guy that works in the cubicle next to you.
That is hilarious. Yeah, if somebody gets up from their desk at work and goes for a pee, and you know they're going to be gone for 5 minutes, you could totally walk around to their machine and change what their web browser does.
So stop typing, contact IT security immediately.
You could absolutely
and then I think all you got to do is just hit the return key before it gets back, and it's all gone, and it never happens again.
Yeah,
Never
you can totally
done
do
that. Never done that. Ever.
It's like the old turning somebody's screen upside down while they're gone.
Yeah. That's so subtle.
Yeah, this is so. Yeah, that's reflected and stored in reality. That is what they do, and where it gets stored for this particular attack is kind of meaningless, other than getting past whatever validation they might have. So, if we put more validation into this, I'd have to be more subtle about how I dealt with this. So if I'm allowed, say, numbers, letters, spaces, etc., I could potentially use, instead of putting in lesser than, greater than, etc., to create my tags, I could use the decimal interpretation of those.
Yeah.
Or the URL encoding of those.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, I'm now passing a number. I'm passing something that would pass the validation, but when it gets loaded by a browser, would still be read as and executed as a tag. So everything else now just becomes, what validation do they have?
Yeah.
And therefore, what can I do? On the website side, they could be storing that in a file like we've done here. They could be storing that in a database.
Yeah,
they could
ready
be
for somebody to call it.
Yeah, that could be dropping into a backup drive. That could be anything you want on that side of it. Is all you're saying is, I'm going to give you an input, you're going to store it. Where we see this time codes in. That was it.
Hey, I love it.
That's cross-site scripting.
I love it.
That's
amazing.
That's it. Has anybody got any questions, I suppose?
How about shortened URLs? Why these are considered an issue? I mean, please provide us examples. How these could be used.
Oh, so I assume you mean things like tiny URL?
Truncated LinkedIn.
Yeah,
website links.
Things like tiny URL. Yeah.
Or Grabify.
Grabify. Yeah, so they essentially create a link to your main URL.
Yeah.
So you go to tiny.url, you give them a tiny URL, and what happens when you click on one of those links is it goes to the tiny website, and the tiny website gives your browser the full link that relates to. The reason they're a big problem is because a normal user can't look at the link and see script tags.
Yeah.
They just look at it and it says tiny.url / 5 characters, a reference number, which looks, and that is no different. So a malicious one looks no different then from a legitimate one. So that's been a big problem, sharing links on social media.
Yeah.
So sharing stuff on social media then becomes a problem because you're looking at something that is, click here to see this image in full, click here to read the news article, click here to whatever it happens to be. And what you're clicking is a tiny URL as you would normally click on a social media platform or something. But it's behind it, there's a malicious one that it translates into when you click on it.
Could we encode the URL with parameters or base64 encoded malicious code?
To these tiny URLs. It depends on what the website the other end kind of does, is the honest answer. So the website the other end would have to be decoding those parameters. If I pass base64 into this website here, for example, it's not going to be able to read it. It'll just spit the base64 back out at me because I have no function in my code to decode the base64. So at no point will it actually, is there a function to do that? Now, if there was a website, and some of them do, so some of them will accept compressed requests, so you can kind of tar.gz or something, gzip up your request headers and things like that to compress the request. Some of them will have functions that do base64 decoding if you pass it parameters in base64. If you can figure out what encoding some of this stuff is using or what encryption or, etc., and then encode, encrypt, however you want to do it, your parameters in the way that they will read them the other side. That's another way to do it. You also can do certain things with serialization and deserialization if that's happening on the other side. So there's a number of things about how the architecture on the server is running that could potentially allow you to craft a slightly different payload to send it to them. Can you show how to protect against this in your PHP? Actually, the PHP that's here would protect against it. The only thing that's not here to protect against it at the moment is because we are doing file put contents, the get username. So protecting this so that somebody can't do it would be relatively simple, I think. I think I can use my preg match and do a preg replace. Button. Replace it with nothing in that string. So using a slightly different function here for my file put contents. So this is where I'm now saving the last user. This is where we're now saving the last user here. And we're saying, so instead of just saving whatever was put in, I'm going to save, I'm going to first sanitize the input by removing anything or replacing any characters that are not standard alphabet characters. I'm going to replace them with empty characters before I save it to that file, at which point I've now sanitized the thing that's being saved. and I can probably, if I open that, go there. Let's open it up alongside it so we can see it. If I do let's stick Action John in there, we can see Action John appears over here in our, so I end up now saving script alert test script with nothing that is executable. So if I then went back and tried to run this again, and let's use a legitimate Action John user, and we say hello, it just says the last one to log in was script alert test script. So we could add that in, or alternatively, we can move this whole piece here into our else statement. So we don't save anything unless it's been through our validation check first.
Yeah.
And then it will never save to the file unless it's already been sanitized and it's already been sorted.
So we've got a bit of chat going on.
Yeah.
So Martin, for example, is saying just how big a problem is cross-site scripting, and can you give us an example of how this has been used to cause problems, which is fair, right? Because building it out this way is a great way of showing how it works in code,
yeah,
showing how easy it is to leave it out, because we get carried away with making it work rather than securing it. But then when we come to securing it, it's once again like it's one word. You know, we thought the SQL one where you put 4 words in was easy. You know, this is like 1 word or 2 words or 3 words. So the fix isn't difficult. But shockingly, this is left out of a huge number of websites.
Yes.
This particular cross-site scripting tends to get left out even when SQL injection has been put in.
Yeah, even when SQL protection has been put in.
And I think it's because the whole injection thing, when you say injection, people go, oh, SQL injection.
Yeah, you're trying to access and steal my data, so
it's
I'm
a
going to protect my data.
It's a database problem, not a website problem. But in terms of if you kind of Googled this, mine, you would see dozens and dozens of sites that say and claim that this is genuinely the biggest problem from a website front end point of view. And remember, the reason we're doing this is because it's on the OWASP top 10, right? And it's in the broken authentication stuff, isn't it? Is where this fits in the OWASP top 10. Because if you get this right, you can actually steal or reflect back to yourself or get hold of people's account details. You will get, for example, all of their session cookies. So if you're getting session cookies back from people because you're managing to pull this stuff off through these kind of vulnerabilities when they're logging in or when they're trying to log into, you know, into account basis, the kind of stuff you can get fed back to you just leaves them wide open, you know, and session cookies is probably a good example of that. But it is huge as a problem.
Can do all kinds of stuff.
Shockingly.
All kinds of stuff. And it's shockingly simple. As well as we've seen today to do it. It's also one of the easiest things to find on a site because all you need is an input and you can completely automate the test for it.
Yeah, true.
Which makes it quite easy to script the attacks based on it. So there's one there, one of the most famous attacks called Sammy. Within 20 hours, over 1 million users had fallen victim to the vulnerability. I'm running it as the server. I'm running it as though it's running it itself, and therefore it implicitly will trust what's being passed to it in the hook, and that becomes a problem. Or people that are actually putting hard coding their own stuff into widgets and into other areas on WordPress where they're putting in JavaScript, they're putting in handling, or they're writing their own PHP to handle a function. And I mean, you can interact directly with the WordPress database and stuff through your PHP. So there is a number of ways you can take what is a secure WordPress site and make it insecure.
I think from a WordPress perspective, do you remember there was a time when WordPress instantly was synonymous with keylogging?
Yeah.
And you think, you know, why did everybody keep doing the keylogging one on WordPress?
Yeah.
You know, why did it? And actually, it's because of these plugins, and because of the placement of a lot of these plugins, cross-site scripting was the obvious exploit.
Yeah.
And one of the things you can very simply do with cross-site scripting in this way is set up a keylogger.
Well, yeah, you can set a script. So you can, in JavaScript, very, very simply, you can do a script that just intercepts every key press you press on the website, and then makes a request with that key press to send that off to your malicious server.
And
so every time
it doesn't stop people doing
it just sends
anything.
it across. Everything works
They
fine.
don't notice it.
No.
They don't even know it's happening. It's exactly the
It
same as
just
well, by the
happens in
way.
the background.
Watching somebody else's screen. Do you remember? I'm going back many years ago. Do you remember the program Watch?
Yes.
And that was based on exactly the same thing. That was saying, well, I'm just going to get in the way of your computer and your screen, and I'm going to just get that and copy it across to me, and I'm literally just going to be watching what's going on. And the way you would set that up is also cross-site scripted.
That worked the same way that modern RDP works in terms of it's actually just sending lots of images of your screen back.
Yeah.
So it's taking lots of screenshots in effect of your screen and sending it back, but it's screenshotting your screen every time something moves.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or, or every time you type something, you're just sending it back to this other server that's then reconstituting those into something you can watch.
Yeah.
And some of this stuff just isn't that complicated to do. It's also not that complicated to secure against today. It's just that not everybody does it.
And we've seen why, right? In fact, we've demonstrated why with this code. Great question here from No Name as a follow-up for this, which is this idea that says, is it still a risk of websites you can get access to passwords stored in the browser? Now, again, you're right. That's kind of a long time ago when that used to happen. But you're almost talking about session cookies being as good as now, aren't you?
Yeah, so
some of these
getting
cookies,
access to your saved passwords, not so much. The answer is not no, but it's not so much. I mean, that's a lot harder to do. So there's, lot harder to do, especially with things like the encryption they use these days.
Yeah.
So that became a lot harder to do. However, when we moved to things like OAuth, and we moved to things like the JWT implementation, so we're using web tokens to do our auth, and we're using session cookies, and we're using that kind of session ID and that session variables to manage the session that we have. I don't need your password if I can get your current tokens or your current session details.
Yeah.
If I can just take the current details that your browser is passing up saying, honest, I'm already logged in.
Yeah.
And then I just attach that same token to my request, then I'm actually just making requests as you. So I no longer need to authenticate if I can just take your authenticated information already.
Which is a lot easier.
It's a yes and no.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier to do.
Well, cross-site scripting can grab cookies.
Yep.
No problem. And dump cookies.
And server-side stuff, if there's a server-side injection, I can also use that server-side injection to potentially grab files from the server. So there's another form of this, which is a file inclusion vulnerability, which kind of uses the same injection methodology, whereby if we, like where we have here file get contents last user.txt, if we can get in the way of that and say, well, get me the etc shadow file and just give me all the users, or get me the sessions file, get me the names of all of the sessions, get me the details of all the sessions, and send those back to me instead. So there's a number of ways that you can start getting in the way of sessions and start getting to log in. And actually, once I can log in as you, or once I can make a authenticated request as you, I can either just steal your details, or I can authenticate as you, and then with Selenium to manipulate a site, or other open source tools that already do this.
Not
bunch.
that Jack's already planning on doing it.
Jack's all over.
He's looking for tools to make it happen.
So you can automate it with pretty much anything you want. You can do this with curl and a bash script. You can do this with Python. You wouldn't necessarily need Selenium, but you can use Selenium. There are also automated tools. So OWASP Zap, for example.
Yes.
The OWASP Zap proxy, which is their version of Burp Suite, actually does this by default. I can just give it a URL, and it goes and looks through that whole website and tests every input for cross-site scripting and injections. And I can do that out of the box. It's free. It's one-click install on most operating systems. I can do the same thing with Burp Suite, in fact.
It's not surprising.
And it's free.
I mean, we're following. I mean, this has come because we went through the OWASP top 10, right? And Zap is designed specifically to go and test all of it.
It's an OWASP top 10 tester. So absolutely, you can do this. Used Zap on my last project, was good. Yeah, absolutely. I quite like Zap, actually. I think it's underrated for what it is. A lot of people prefer to go into Burp Suite and start putting modules into it that do these jobs. I quite like Zap as as just a first point of call. It's very simple. It's very simple in terms of what it does. Burp Suite is a lot more layered and a lot more advanced. You can do some really cool stuff with Burp Suite that you can't do with Zap.
Yeah, but it takes you 4 hours to set the bloody thing up.
But you do have to go and do a bunch of stuff, and you have to pay for it, and you have to do a whole bunch of other stuff. Whereas Zap is a great. Is this website got anything that is just at that base surface layer that should have been protected against?
Yeah. Is there anything?
Am I really gonna have to try on this one, or can I just run Zap at it and it's gonna say no, here's a clanger? So I quite like Zap for that. It is good. If you need to allow characters which allow cross-site scripting in your application, does that mean every site is vulnerable? Not necessarily. It depends on how you're using those characters. And it depends on what you're doing with that user input. So if you have to allow characters that are doing that, another way to do another way, if we look at the PHP we've got here, another thing I could do here, if I just bring this down, instead of using their username, I could have an allowed list. So very often the way that you would, if you are required to allow certain characters, like for argument's sake, less than, greater than, forward slashes, backslashes, those, speech marks, those kind of things. If you require those to be allowed in your application, it's probably because you have a fixed set of parameters for your application. So we could change this to say, if our get username equals action job, then do this other thing. So we can say, if it's one of our allowed statements, then do this, and eventually, and then we can do an else if it equals Jason, or we're just now saying this has to equal a value that we're expecting now before we'll do anything, and then you get to an else, and then you're just saying the message is wrong input. So now you've got every eventuality that you're expecting somebody to type in there belongs up here, and it will only do processing if it recognizes that name. And instead of reflecting back the username that I typed in, I could now say, instead of reflecting this back, I don't need to use that because I know the input that he's typed in, and I can hard code hi action John. And in this case, I could hard code hi Jason. So I can sit there and say, if it's a recognized input, then I will do something with it. But because I know what the input is, I don't need to use the input to make the message. So now there's nothing here that can be injected. So although I'm still using that username, I'm still allowing them to type in whatever character they want. They now can't do anything with it because I have set the parameters on my side to say only allow these combinations of these characters. So if you do have an application where you need to use those characters, all of these together into one thing, and say, if it's one of them, it's definitely fine. If it's one of them, it's definitely fine. Otherwise, if it's got anything other than these characters in it, then it's not. So, otherwise, then it's probably fine. So we can even, we can make this if statement as complicated as we want to make it. We can make it as layered as we want to make it. We could do some further internal validation to say, well, actually, I think this might be fine. Let's go and compare it to a list of known stuff. And if it's on our list of known stuff, we could have a database sitting somewhere with thousands of allowed permutations. We could be saying, go and check if a user exists in the database with that name first.
Yeah.
And only if a user exists, allow it to happen. So there's a whole bunch of stuff there that we could do, but that's about changing the logic of our program to respond to the need to have something that might be vulnerable coming in. And we're into risk management now instead of
absolutely.
getting rid of risk.
Paul summed that up nicely. He's saying, so basically check every input before it's out. and you can safely output anything at a later date.
Absolutely. The other thing you can do
that's your
is
validation, sanitation,
sanitization,
not sanitation.
Well, the other thing you can do is sanitize it on the other side. So this HTML special characters type function here, what this actually does is this is for outputting stuff. So it takes whatever you put into it and removes malicious characters from it before it gets displayed to the user. Now,
well, it doesn't take the malicious characters away. It doesn't
stops them executing.
So what it does is it sends it back as a string.
It sends it back as a
it doesn't remove them. That cleansing that you're talking about is a different function.
So preg replace, which actually replaces the bad characters before you display it to a user. That's one form of sanitization. Another one is just cancel them out and use them as a string. So don't execute them.
Play them back, but don't execute them as code.
So that's another way to do it. If you absolutely have to save the bad characters, you can do it on the other way out.
Really good question from Martin, because he's saying, "Is this just a website issue?" Do you know what? It's really not.
No.
And I know you're angling after Teams here, but one of the second biggest usage of this kind of stuff is actually IMAP and SMTP injection into email servers.
Yeah.
Because you can use exactly the same methodologies here, but instead of doing it in HTML, you're doing it in IMAP and SMTP, and you're pushing it into a mail server to tell the mail server, and now giving instructions to a mail server in exactly the same way. It's an injection attack that's got nothing to do with SQLs, nothing to do with the websites, etc. And now you can attack stuff that's not even visible from the net. So because you're pushing it in via an email account.
And
so
it can happen on live chat systems.
Yeah.
Things like Teams are pretty well protected against it, as are things,
very much so. I think from the moment you say networking tools and then you follow that up with the word Microsoft. Actually, what you're looking at here is it's less about Microsoft Teams or Microsoft 365 or the email or whatever, and you're now talking about Azure. So can stuff like this be done on Azure is a better question than can this be done on Teams, because
Absolutely.
all of them leverage that automated authentication suite that they have, which ties all of those services that are being delivered off Azure together, doesn't it?
Yeah, they do. So Azure as a hosting environment, as a cloud hosting environment, well, actually, Azure is over 80% Linux, right?
Shocking.
Nobody uses Azure for Microsoft service.
And yet, even though the underlying, because we've had this debate, haven't we, over beer, with many a happy Microsoft person that then decided that it shouldn't.
They don't talk to us very much anymore,
But although they've got all of that stuff in their architecture, you then get through into the actual deliverable layers. And Azure won't run Linux properly in any of its VMs because it uses all of the Azure libraries instead of the Linux libraries. And it's like, but if you just get back into your core layer,
you just get back to
you're
more
using more Linux than I am.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Now, actually, you can. It's just hosting infrastructure. It's just hosting architecture. There's IIS, which is their version of a web server, like we would put Apache or Nginx or whatever onto Nginx, onto a Linux server, whatever it happens to be. This sort of stuff it's there. It's doable. It's an application that sits on top of that infrastructure and that web server. If you badly code the application, it will work.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do we got here? We got more comments?
Stopped like 100% of SQL injections of different complexity. Is it correct? Interesting. I would like to see the research.
Yeah, the statistics, especially if you go to OWASP top 10 and look at the stats that underpin that. That's really not what it says. But
yeah, I'd like to see the research on the 100% stuff. That would, if somebody is out there saying that they can stop 100% of things like SQL injection, you can, there are ways of doing it so that you don't use user inputs in your SQL in your SQL queries. If you did it that way, then yes, absolutely, there isn't anything to inject. Same with the cross-site scripting. If you never use user inputs, then in your code. But yeah,
Yeah, let's say no instead.
yeah, there are some systems out there that are pretty good at it. There are some systems out there that are pretty good at it, and their success rate at stopping these kind of attacks is pretty high and is pretty good and pretty robust. So yes, there are some good ones out there, and they're getting better. The problem is I can release right now something that is amazing or